in which we resume podcasting for the 5th time this year.
No, you pick up.
No, you pick up.
No, you pick up.
I don't know how to start this shit anymore. Okay. Hi, and welcome to another episode. Yes, an actual other episode of Radio Free Golgotha with your hosts, the Good Doctor and the Goat.
Hello.
The artists formerly known as Dr. Alexander Cummins. I almost put a G in there.
People do.
Yeah.
People do.
No, Cummins, sorry. And yours truly, Jesse Hathaway Diaz. So, this is an early December recording in hopes of getting this out within the week for the good Saint Lucy, who is, and the plethora of other Sesame Street subjects that we have in store for you surrounding her. Radio Free Golgotha has been technically on the air for a year. We found that it takes a lot of time to dedicate to a podcast and editing and things like that when we had a much busier year than either of us intended. Not an excuse, but the reason why there's 5/6 if you count the 2-part Candlemas episodes this year. We hope to double that next year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But we've missed recording, and certainly it feels good to close out on some topics that we are excited to talk about.
Yeah, it's been lovely to have the support of people who've been excited about the episodes we've done, asking about when more are coming and that kind of thing. It's really nice to feel like we're not just having a geek out conversation amongst ourselves, but are also sparking conversations and threads and comments and things.
So what you're saying is you want to see other people. Okay, understood. Why should tonight be different than any other night, Al? Okay.
No.
Okay, so you might hear some. I apologize for the mouse clickings and things where I might edit those out. I might not.
You might get some little rat sneezes as well.
You might. Yeah, we're recording in my room where there's at least one rat curiously staring at us, wondering what it is that we're doing.
Rest assured, they will be adorable if you do hear them.
Yes. So today's episode is brought to you by St. Lucy, Mistletoe, Laetitia or Obará, the Odú that corresponds, oil lamps. You're going to have to say that.
Clistheret or Clistheret, depending on the manuscript.
Okay. What he said.
Or Ciramel.
Okay. And the corresponding issue to that is Tronqueira. Amethyst. We're going to go with Casanova? Why not?
Sure, yeah.
Sure, if we get to him.
Uh-huh.
And some Judgement, because there's always plenty of Judgement.
Always plenty of room.
Always, all my Venn diagrams overlap in Judgement. So that is our structure for today. And welcome. So, okay. Obviously, St. Lucy is a saint that I assume is as dear to your heart, at least in part as she is to mine. But am I wrong? Saints are like the easiest way to start going in.
I think so. Yeah. I mean that's our calendrical kind of metric.
So I mean 13, the 13th of December. So 13 is already a good number. So it's like the St. Anthony correspondence, right? But St. Lucy is the saint that marked the winter solstice once upon a time on the old calendar. So she has always been associated with the return of the light. Not always. That was a quick...
Well, I mean, depending on how you read the name.
That's true. Lucy, yes, exactly. And her use as patroness of the eyes, of eyesight, of against the evil eye, of health, of warning, of steadfastness, of stability, that envy and intrigue and fame and infamy do not divert you from your center. It seems to be a big thing for her, and that's tied up in her legend as well, as is the eyesight and the evil eye. Also, her use heavily in traditional witchcraft as far as Western Europe goes, which I'm more familiar with. I'm sure she's used worldwide in many ways, but as lovingly referred to her as the Lucifera, the female light bringer. And we'll get more into those flavors as we go on, but there is something so interesting about a young female saint. She's not quite a child spirit, but she acts similar sometimes in some mythologies and some permutations and folk Catholic and syncretic versions of her.
Well, she's young and a virgin, crucially,
Yes.
and that virginity also seems, having just been reading her entry in the Golden Legend on the train up here, that virginity is very much understood in...
You do homework?
In that medieval period. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. On occasion, when I can't pay someone on the internet to do it for me. The notion of her bringing the light and that kind of that looks of the way of the light, and there's a lot emphasized in terms of the straightness of light and the way it doesn't bend, despite
mirrors. Mirrors.
right. Wow. But not according to the medieval writers and thinkers on that, and people, I guess. But a sense of her chasteness, and that chastity has something to do with the light, and that all things are kind of good in the light. It's very much that model of gosh, we hope that we don't all die in darkness, which seems apt to be something that you're celebrating or fervently praying to during winter and the solstice.
I like the result of the calendar shift, the calendrical shift from Julian to Gregorian, of her being the herald of light, even though it's going to get worse.
Right.
Even though we've still got a good up to 9 days at most, probably maybe 10, but within a week, it's still going to be a week of encroaching darkness, and the dragon will still look like it's going to win. And this mythology of Lucy riding in on the dragon or these other things are preceding the dragon, because she does come on the back of the dragon. The dragon is winning. The serpents of various European lore are stealing the sun, and Lucy herself predicts that we are going to come out the other side.
Right.
And so there's a hint there, almost for me, of like the Saint Margaret ideas of being swallowed by the dragon or the demon, and then like stuck in the mouth and stabbing it and like being victorious
in the depths of hell.
Yeah.
The light of heaven.
And also that Lucy, at least in a lot of folk Catholic traditions in Western Europe, is also some connection to Candlemas and the return of the light that's confirmed. So Lucy's promise is echoed in Candlemas. And there's this kind of hint of the Advent wreath being on her head and everything like that. But there's this common practice in, especially in Iberian witchcraft, of taking a piece of the sun with you as you go into night. So at twilight you salute the sun, so that in darkness you still have a memory of the light, which is interesting as we talk about, or the way I talk about Kimbanda in this way of like the memory of angelic light, or the memory of something above ground going into hell, that the memory of the angelic choir is what allows the creative impulse that Lucifer has to keep dispersing. And here we have a Lucifera that is distributing light in a different form. She comes in on the vehicle of darkness itself during the waning of the year, and yet somehow in the belly of the serpent, light will be back, and she will confirm it and seal it come Candlemas.
That steadfastness is really awesome, I think, as well. That the idea of as the sun stands still, so she does, and certainly within her Solstice, some of her myths, she has this notion of going before, being like shopped as a Christian to the guy she's betrothed to, and him saying,
means she's a virgin.
Yeah, and
I'm really loud on these recordings. I'm sorry. I'm noticing the digital patterns and be like, damn. Sorry. Go on.
Being dragged, she's ordered to be dragged to a brothel to be defiled, so that she can't speak the word of God anymore, and have her power taken away. And interestingly, she says, if that occurs against my will, it only doubles my chastity, which is interesting in of itself. But that she cannot be moved. Thousands of soldiers attempt to move her, and she cannot be moved. And so that idea of being the still point in the belly of hell is also interesting, and making things cohere around you rather than you being buffeted by these flames and darkness. And
I for everything we do about her eyesight and the plucking of the eyes, whether by her own hand or her eyes being plucked out, echoes her patron saint. which is Agatha.
Right.
And the removal of the breast.
Yeah, she goes before one of her superhero origin stories is that they go and pray to Agatha, her and her mother, because her mother is very sick. And and Lucy directs her mother to pray to Agatha, and then falls asleep and has a dream that Agatha comes and says, "Why are you asking me to do this when you can just do this?" Mm-hmm. It's the idea of making a saint on the point of another saint, their patron.
Yeah, and what's interesting is if we're talking about the return to Canomus, Agatha is early February, so there's this interesting thing of the student of a saint who herself is a saint being the bookends around this feast. Although I guess the more proper bookend around Christmas would probably be Epiphany, because for me the it starts with Lucy. Mm-hmm. It's the final week of what we're doing, and then Christmas itself, which is sealed in the 12 days after.
She's that kind of Cassandra to it.
Yeah,
like, it's going to get better, and you're like, no, but it's not getting better.
Not gonna get better.
It's dark.
You're lying to me.
Yeah.
And you have a sword in your throat.
Yeah.
So there's the way, right? So she speaks the way. Even the sword. Some of the old woodcuts, when you look for her, have nothing to do with the eyes, and indeed you noted quite aptly the eyes are not mentioned in the Golden Legend.
No.
So the most popular dispersal of Saint Lord does not mention eyes at all, but that is what most of us now know her as holding the plate with the eyes, which comes from probably 18th and 19th century statues, popularizing that in some way. So I'm not sure which eye cult she picked up on in Italy or Greece or somewhere.
Or Sweden, right?
Or Sweden, yeah.
The Scandinavian countries have make Lucy's eyes little saffron delicious pastries.
Which is funny because you do Agatha's breasts in Europe as well. Mm-hmm. So you have a parallel. That's interesting. The two saints almost cannot be separated.
What's that thing about the nipples are the eyes of the chest?
The nipples are the eyes are the nipples of the face.
That's it. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Damn it, whatever movie that is. Oh, it's so sad that I don't remember that. St. Lucy. All right. Anyway. So, I'm curious too about, because the eye and the sun, the connection between the eye and that which sees and the light bringer, that it is a natural progression that if this thing is evolving around light in this way, or revolving around light, or devolving around light. One of my favorite things in the revelation of cosmology of the Middle Ages is that the world is not geocentric, it is diablocentric.
Right.
That the devil is at the center of the universe, the entire world revolves around him, which only gives credence to everything he says.
God's out there.
God's way, way out there, and the earth, there's the spheres of the onion layers of the element, and the onion keeps going in with earth, and then to the depths of the earth, and the devil in the center. Mm-hmm. So it only helps, but, sorry, my devolving spurred that. Lucy herself connected to the preservation of the physical eyes, and the eyes being always connected to the sun, the thing that lets in light, but the spherical nature that we know if they pluck them out, they're very much these things. Or the eyes being the mirror to the soul, that the eyes are, yes, round, but are also in the shape of a vagitus, that they are the Vesica Pisces by their shape, the almond shape that is the intersection of worlds. So there's an internal, external world, there's the interior life, the external life. The light being let into the body in that way is always
and the idea of a holy figure blinding oneself as well, and that notion of that Teresian second sight business as well.
Yes, that her second sight comes, and that even that she trusts enough that if she blinds herself, that she's seen the light of God, and that itself has like the Pauline reference of being blinded by Christ's light. I firmly acknowledge. I have a very strange take on a lot of this because I'm operating in folk Catholicism, which is operating alongside traditional witchcraft and syncretic ideas of things in the New World. And Lucy is at once all of her masks and none, and she is something other, and the container and the contained. I also acknowledge that our audience varies in that way too, that there are people who are more towards the Catholic bend and people who are more towards the witchcraft bend or more towards the sorcery bend or the syncretic bend. And that's always interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, and in modern practice, I mean, one of the things that marks Lucy as important in my household practice, our household practice of my wife and I, and our dearly beloved cat. Oh yeah. Heck yeah, several times to the same lady. You got to lock that down.
It's like your third wife and your first wife.
You remind me of my second wife. I am your second wife.
But I am your daughter.
Our neighbourhood in Brooklyn, Carroll Gardens, has a Lucy statue that is an ex voto, and there is a whole story attached to it, which I love. and can recount and will forcibly recount to anyone that comes to visit, which is that...
Which is different from recant.
Yes, oh, very much so. A gentleman by the name of Todi Balsamo, so the urban legend goes, is having eyesight trouble and is about to go in for slightly experimental surgery. I think this is around the 70s, and has a dream in which Saint Lucy appears and says, "I got you on this. It's fine. I will take you through this dark time and bring you into the light, and all will be well." And the surgery goes great. He can see again, so he builds this statue for her, which is on one of the corners in Carroll Gardens. And when Todi Balsamo passes, his kids start using that space as a place to honour him and his memory. So here's a guy who lived in the neighbourhood, had a fairly typical like medieval saint experience, and treated it in that way of offering an ex voto, of doing something in return, in thanks, and has then become in some way mixed in to this very localized cultus, and she receives flowers on her feast day and on his birthday, and I think on his death day, and a couple of other dates of significance. And it's gated off, but it's available to enter, and people leave things there, and I see people praying there sometimes. And I love this idea of this being something that's still going on, and that people are still doing. A saint will can still turn up to someone who is not carting around 8 billion saint statues, or doing all of the other things that we end up doing, and still solving a very concrete problem and being recognized for it, and having a permanent point or station in the neighborhood now, and her devotees kind of melding with, and family traditions melding with her as she's brought in. And so she's above our door, and we offer cultus and flowers and prayer and stuff at her time. And that's really important, I think, to look for the local saints, not just because someone wanted to honor, although that's fine too, but there was a specific case value behind that, which is very appealing. And also offers a physical space to go and do stuff as well, which is super important.
Carroll Gardens has a lot of that. I mean, it's what's unique in going to Carroll Gardens. There are a lot of saint shrines up here in the Bronx and in Inwood. Yard shrines, of course. Carroll Gardens definitely seems to have, because of the homogeneity of the Italian culture there, garden shrines are a big thing. So, like, many corners are still... They obviously belong to someone, but they become saint gardens in devotion. So there's these crossroad saints constantly, in addition to yard saints, which is lovely.
Yeah. One of the reasons why it's called Carroll Gardens is because the gardens are out on the front. There's a little bit of a driveway with some grass and stuff, and so you get a lot of those things that even Italian-American scholars refer to as Mary on a half shell, and those beautiful little yard shrines, Marys, Anthony's, and various others. It's marvellous.
The sword in the throat thing too is interesting, because I mean, we're talking about saints usually ruling the manner or the quality of their death, or the quality, the narrative of their death, being patrons in this way, and to have the throat, the source of the voice, be silenced. Which, of course, beheading is a common thing, but like to see that she could still speak, with the sword, plunged in her, or that
boiling oil,
submerged or poured
in the Golden Legend.
That's what I thought. Okay, I didn't think she was a cauldron saint.
No,
but this is reflected in the tradition that is. I know that it is done in, I think, central Italy, and definitely in Sicily and Spain, of pouring hot oil on the statue during her feast, which becomes the oil of St. Lucy, which, yes, has traditional prayers and devotions, and it almost always involves rue and fennel and a whole slew of other herbs, but it's one of the earliest oils that I made for sale, even within the store, but mainly because I don't doubt that oil. It's such a Lucy thing, but to have the boiling oil over that means that like oftentimes you have to repair the statue within a month or two and repaint it, and do whole new devotions. But like she gets you through the day, and this idea of pouring hot oil, not necessarily boiling it because that would be really splattery, but hot oil.
I love those those devotional acts that force you to, that actually kind of ruin or not ruin maybe, but get rid of something like the paint on a thing that then has to be redone. That it's not enough to just use the thing. In fact, use of a thing, characters or seals painted on a tool that you're handling a lot, fading with time, and then having to be reapplied. And that act of you can tell when it needs like reconsecrating because the seal has become too scuffed.
Yes, and that this comes with a common thing with many tools, right? Of you don't want to use it because it's frail, but at the same time, like, well, then fix it and make it stronger. There's a value in strengthening a tool to come back. Yeah. That restoring a house doesn't mean that the house is of less value. And it's interesting. There's a lot of tool talk that could come out of that as well. But no, it's a lovely idea that repairing a statue, yes, or the fact that marble was painted with garish colors, and we have this very specific idea the last 300 years of white marble being so, that's what it was, and then you realize, like, I'm sorry, Athena was draped in pink in the Parthenon. The Parthenon was pink. Like, what? You painted ivory?
Right.
You defiled ivory with pink. That's a whole other thing. Just the garish colors and the brightness of it. And I remember in the early days of my budding European magical career, I was 12 or 13 and looking at Golden Dawn stuff, seeing pictures of the Cicero's tools that were so bright and garish and being like, what is that? Right. That's way more than I'm ready for. Thinking how basic it was, or to reinsert a modern word on there, but thinking like, what? I don't know if that's really stirring something, and realizing like this is actually probably one of the things that Golden Dawn hit on that is actually closer to how things were done. That bright colors, bright ochres, bright blues, bright whites, those types of things, that the history of pigment and the minerals in the earth and the richness that comes from having choice in color is quite profound.
Sure. And I mean, obviously, operatively useful and understood in terms of flashing colours, often deliberate clashing the colour wheel to produce these effects. And also, it's often framed in terms of the emergence of artificial pigments as well in the end of the 19th century, that suddenly these tones were possible that weren't before. But that's interesting in of itself, the use of new things in a traditional manner. Yeah,
for sure. I think about this a lot with the brightness of a color that like specifically in the ATRs, in Ocha and Orisha tradition especially, that I'm most intimately familiar with, of color itself having an ashe. And that the bright blue of laundry bluing is substituting for the bluing of indigo. That we like, indigo dyes cloth, but when you're painting something to use that laundry bluing, that's even brighter. Like, use that. There is virtue in the color alone, not just the physical substance of it. And this is something that is a shift, I think, in the way that the European mindset tends to think about things, because we have a materialism streak post-industrial revolution, post-scientific revolution. We tend to think, no matter, I see the same thing in everything from neo-hoodoo to witchcraft to approach towards ATRs, that somehow, if we break it down on a molecular level, there's some chemical in that thing that we just don't know about that's doing the magic, opposed to a magical worldview.
Right. Which is that classic, look at these psychological studies that have proven what magicians have been saying for ages, which allows us to be smug when we're saying we've been saying this for ages, but also it's still basically attempting to define ourselves and our practice based off a worldview that's incredibly aggressive, if not dismissive, of the whole concept itself.
That you don't have to go, oh, well, I really would like to use the indigo. And it's like, well, that's interesting, because the traditional people that are carrying the extant practice, that going back and looking at what the modern Yoruba are doing, they are using laundry bluing because it is bright blue, because the point is to get blue so that when you see it, you get a reaction of, that is blue. Not, oh, I wonder if that's made with real indigo. The point is that it's blue.
Right.
I come across this with oil making because people don't doubt the ingredients that are dirt or plant material or animal matter. What comes into doubt or question sometimes is when an ingredient is literally 77 steps forward and 3 steps back, or a lie, or a kiss, or like why is that an ingredient? And like, don't worry about why. Does it work? And obviously it needs to be one of the ingredients for it to work. So let's move on past the limited materialist thinking that traps us into thinking that it's just science that's undiscovered.
Right.
Science can be a part of a magical worldview.
Oh, absolutely.
But the other side of it, not quite as much. So we need to stop trying to force fit.
Right, and also...
You can still fit that circle peg into the square hole, but you can't fit the square peg into the round hole. Just saying.
Unless it's a lot smaller.
Unless you chew it and poop it through.
It's kind of informed by this approach of like needing to be more authentic.
More Irish than the Irish.
Right. The which is, you know, arguably impelled by the sense of having lost something, and so needing to do it right, and do it from a distance, and do it removed from the culture. Not in a deliberate effort to be better than the culture that originated it, but if only in terms of trying to feel like, you know, you're pouring something into this gulf between you, and that's certainly present in, say, you know, instances I've heard you and other Santeros talk about with the Yoruba use of plastics for things, because it's a great tool, and they have a traditional approach to the materials and the tools that are needed, but not a dogmatic approach to every ingredient or every materia has to be, you know, you should have some gourds, but not everything has to be.
And the taking out of even putting things in traditional gourds, which deteriorate and break, with using porcelain and china, which is a sign of wealth and establishing trade relationships with other cultures.
Right.
So it is interesting that it's a good comparison. That we don't, in the diaspora, we're going to prize our use of the gourds, and we're going to have a stack of jicaras, of gourds sitting there, and that's what we're going to pour our water and our wine and all of our libations out of. And I go to a traditionalist Yoruba ceremony, and they're using my Chinese food, boneless ribs comes in, that deli plastic container, and I sit there and I have to challenge my thought of like, well, that's just, I like the gourd. Yeah, the gourd aesthetic is lovely, but it's an aesthetic, and they don't have anything to prove. They have nothing to gamble on, or they're not trying to. It's really about not proving anything, I'm sure. But plastic, you can drop it; it doesn't break. Plastic can take hot or cold, and you can bleach it. Being able to bleach a substance is really important in blood sacrifice religions. I'm just putting it out there. And it reminds me too, one of the arguments I've had, I probably even mentioned on this program before, but spam. That spam is, I am sure, it's one of the purest, most profound ancestral offerings, because everything that our ancestors hoped for, that there is a product that is half protein and half fat, akin to bacon, which is like the perfect thing, that has an indefinite shelf life, meaning you can take it with you, you can give it to your grandchildren. It's like better than gold. Of the thought, the mentality of food that you can pass on, food that is permanent. So it started as a joke many years ago, but the importance of things like that like a canned spam does have great significance within a traditional context. I'm not saying that that's what you should ask for first when the divination is going, but you never know.
And what that says about a mindset of approaching these things as well. You know, the surprising things, or the things that might surprise us when we're, trying to be authentica than thou.
I'm sorry. You're wearing Plata and not Prada, and I will not accept your prayers. Yeah.
I only eat certain hearts.
Yes. That's true. That'll be a good footnote. Okay. So the wunderkind that is Saint Lucy, and all of her wonderful stopping the evil eye, and this, I'd love to see more magic that might explore the use of the sword in the throat. Because in her case, it was not being able to stop her preaching. Similar to, I don't see her used as a shut up saint, though. Stopping the evil eye, yes. Stopping from being taken off of your axis, yes.
Right. Precisely, I guess, because she wasn't shut up by it. Although, obviously, there's all sorts of manipulation of the tools of Saints' martyrdom that become their attributes.
Yeah, of course. And then like left-hand, right-hand machinations in Iberia. But
I'm interested in the idea of there being fennel in her traditional oil on the basis of that attribution that it's one of the things that Prometheus stole fire from the gods in as well. And so again, that Luciferian thing, and also the idea of the tube of the throat that has
very
the
interesting.
fire.
Yeah, and even rue, which is one of the most bitter substances, and whether it's a substitute for Syrian rue or not, like, we're talking about the genuine use of rue in the Mediterranean as rue. Which bitter is its own type of fire. Especially when you take something bitter, there is a warmth that goes through the body, which it also stimulates the release of bile from the gallbladder when you take and taste anything bitter, which of course is a whole other type of, we're talking a convergence of possible humoral.
Oh yeah, totally humoral. Yeah, the root notion of digestion is concoction, which is a kind of fire, and that which stokes that fire, bitters as not just digestif, but as present in how we, what's the fancy word for it? Gain nutrients from that which we consume.
That was fancy enough.
Yeah,
you said it in an English accent. I believed you. It's true too. Well, with the brew, just as an aside, in case I forget to mention it later, our demon Exu pair for later.
Oh yeah,
Tronqueira is very associated with rue.
We could jump into that now if you want.
Saints to demons right away. Sure. So, that demon, I can't pronounce it, and I know he does one thing in the book that I know of, and so I have no experience with him, so I bow completely to the good doctor.
Most of the time, in theory, Clistheret in the
sounds like a wine.
Yeah, it does a bit, doesn't it?
Claret, that's why.
Yeah. It spoke with more claret than clarity.
Yes.
He's Clistheret in...
I may or may not be pouring more sangria. I'm not... Yeah, okay. Go on.
Mommy's cup runneth under. Alibek has it as Clistheret, and that's, I think, the more popular one, but Clistheret in Block Hill texts and elsewhere. As I said, in Lansdowne 1202, it's Ceramel or...
It's really sexy when you quote things so well.
It's the beauty of homework. It's a whole
Cover your ass.
It's a whole different kind of cheating. The answer's already lodged in your head. So I wanted to have that demon from Verum because the way it's generally phrased, their office is to make it seem day or night whenever you wish. In one of the other readings in Lansdowne, it's he will make spectators experience day or night, which is already interesting.
Because I'm going to give you the illusion that it's dark when it's light and light when it's dark. Not actually make it.
Yeah. It's a seeming, which is not the grimoire covering its ass. Like, it doesn't need to do that. There are other spirits that it doesn't say seem to bring you gold, or seem to unlock doors, or seem to show you.
But let's be honest, that's the case for most modern workers.
No, I mean,
I'm a millionaire in my own mind.
Right. $10 is a fortune, and you were indeed shown the fortune. No, agreed, and that's interesting in terms of illusions and how we deal with them or don't deal with them, and the idea of a demon of illusion interests me on those grounds. And it splits.
Or a demon of allusion.
Tony Wonder style.
To what does this demon allude to? Anyway,
where does it take us? So there's two ways that I've seen this spirit being worked. One is a direct idea of bringing light or darkness. There is a working in one of the Hadean pamphlets, which I believe is the Goetic spellwork one, in which a lamp is used and can bring light to a situation, is the way it's framed. So we already have a kind of metaphor going on, along with it being made day or it being made light, and seeing. I think I've also seen, I think it's Clistheret who's also used in an operation I've seen to blind enemies as well. And that's already... Which is
sorry, that's in a form of invisibility then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is different than the normal, like, you can't see me, it's because you're so distracted with something else. You're blinded by the sun. Yeah. You're blinded by whatever it is. What can I distract you with? The media flare. Of, like, how can I stir up things that blind you to what's really going. That's fascinating.
Right, and puts confusion workings into the realm of potential confusion workings into the realm of invisibility magic.
Okay, see, then I relate to the St. Lucie factor of we see the dragon manifesting, we see the darkness coming, but there is, for those that can see her and believe in her, the hope is coming.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. Because otherwise our segue was just Rue, and that's a really weak segue.
No, I picked
that starts with R! Rutabaga!
That's a silly word. And a terrible name for a demon, possibly. Or a great name for a familiar. I don't know. Vinegar Tom and Rutabaga. So, that was a deliberate choice, the idea of bringing light. And if I'm remembering this right, the blindness operation is even done with a thing that I talked to the worker that was doing it, and they had used black hellebore based off some law that said whatever you applied, you could use black hellebore to reverse the effects of everything else. So the working is full of like eye bright and things like that for sight, but then there's one ingredient which crucially, they're all about locating what is affected, but the actual effect is flipped. Which I was also fascinated by.
And black hellebore is also associated with algol, which is, the eyes of Medusa there. So that's interesting. Also, the caveat that black hellebore is not what modern people think. Black hellebore is almost all species of European hellebore.
Right.
And it's its own thing. But it was a picky thing. We were like, was it real black hellebore? I was like, it's all black hellebore. Fuck off. We're not talking Storax here.
Right.
No, that's fascinating. Which, interestingly, coincides to our other topic, which is oil lamps.
Yeah.
So it's okay. So there's a flow between everything. I mean, oil lamps here are versatile. Sorry, I'm getting distracted of like having the normal Jesse problem. Like, do I talk about Exu Tronqueira or oil lamps? Because both are in my head right now. Exu Tronqueira has very little to do with oil lamps. Yeah. So let me stick with the thing I started with. Oil lamps. One of the things that I love about oil lamps is the versatility of it, and I think they're an underutilized thing in the modern world, especially since the tools are not readily available in the way that people think they are. First off, paraffin sucks. Paraffin, liquid, or lamp oil is terrible. I hate the smell. It makes me itch. I think it's shit. Spend some money, and by that I mean $5, and get some floating wicks from eBay, from the Greek Orthodox suppliers, and get those 100% pure beeswax that some of them are scented with floral oils, and they will burn in olive oil. And then people go, oh, that's much more expensive. Good, it should be a sacrifice. Almond oil should be a sacrifice. And, the history of the ATR use of oil lamps has its own huge thing. It was a very big thing because 7-day glass candles, let's face it, are a product of modern times.
Right.
So a lot of candle magic is actually oil lamp magic that's been translated.
Right.
And let's not forget the ubiquitous alcohol lamps, which were more common than for people that couldn't. So artists were famous for using alcohol lamps, which was the cheapest alcohol you could buy in there, and that would be your light at night when you were painting. But alcohol in there allowed for putting plants in there, which allowed for actual tinctures being burned, which allowed for those magics to work. The other side with oil lamps is that they are living entities, and once they are made, once the herbs, the minerals, and the prayers have been said...
Such complicated recipe lists for some of them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're tended to, and that as long as there's oil and a flame can be burnt, that they are a living spirit. And according to which tradition you're using them in, that like... in Quimbanda, those are in the province of Nove Luces and Nine Lights and the Exus that control this kind of petitioning through gathering ingredients. You're making, in essence, a bottle spell that is just open and it's inflamed. And you could add other oils that are prepared. You could add a tablespoon of palm oil. You could add grains of paradise. You could add the heart of the pigeon that you fed the bowl to begin with. You could, whatever it is. But that as long as you're keeping it and making sure it doesn't go dry, because animals, anybody who keeps oil lamps, you will have mice problems. They will come and they will drink it and think it is for them. But, changing the wick once a day, as long as you tend to it once a day, it's considered to stay alive. And that even if it goes completely, you don't need it for a while, you still want to store it with oil. And it would be covered and treated like it can be revived right away, and you might just refresh it with a few things. But a lot of our oil traditions come from oil lamps that you wouldn't necessarily make a huge mother bottle and burn everything. We would take a tablespoon of that oil and put it into a more portable one that was for a client or something like that.
Right.
And that in this tending to oil lamps, that you could take a tablespoon of this lamp oil and give it to the person, so that if you have this spell working and it's a spell for reconciliation at home, and the oil lamp is burning at your worker's house because the person's not going to burn a ritual oil lamp in their own house, but maybe they would, or maybe they'd take a tablespoon of that oil and take it home to the lamp that's near the bed, or cook with it, or whatever it is. Certainly you're not going to cook with whale fat in that time, but I mean, like, it just depends on what the oil lamps are made of and how it's going. But once you get away from paraffin, oil lamps become a totally different thing, in my opinion. I also like the idea of edible oils that can be eaten, because they are then eaten by the spirit. They are eaten by the flame, and the flame becomes its own thing. And for a cult like Kimbanda, where the flame is worshipped as a conscious entity, or is understood as a conscious entity, the flame at the crossroads, that each lamp in essence becomes a minor Eshu under the province of the Eshus that have helped build it. And similarly in Ocha, that, you know, if you're going to hollow out a watermelon and put all these things in it for a lamp for a Lokun or Yamaya, and you're filling it with almond oil and it's got all these things in it, that it's a pretty extensive and often expensive undertaking. But lamps work wonders. And I'm telling you, Orthodox oil floats are great. They're a lot easier than building floats the way the books say to do. I know that we can go back and do that. You can flatten out a bottle cap and put a slice of cork in there. But for $4.95, I'm just going to plug it. I will footnote. I'm sorry.
What are you going to spend your fat slice of that Greek Orthodox sponsorship money on? More lamps.
More lamps. The first thing that came to mind, I should not say on the air. But I would take one of those great grand schema cloths that is similar to my whole obsession with Golgotha and things like that. But as an aside, did you see that YouTube video of the guy who it's a monastery where he hammers?
Yes.
And so the calling to prayer is reminding people of the hammering of Noah's Ark. Like, come save yourself.
It's not like a bell. It's like it's a hammer against.
It's a hammer in a specific rhythm which reminds me of other hammered rhythm things like Basque Chalaparta and things like that. But I like this idea of saving yourself. Like, I'm doing the work. If you want to come join me, go ahead. But I'm not telling you have to come. Save yourself or not. Which is a totally different attitude. Like, the bell feels a little bit more like a, come and get it now, or you're going to, you know.
All things shall bow.
So, okay, going back to Exu Tronqueira, who is the Eshu that is associated with Clistheret? Okay. Tronqueira is it's kind of an obsession for me this year, not necessarily Exu Tronqueira, but the Tronqueira in general in Tronco, as I began teaching courses on the Tronco and exploring the corresponding deities of this central world tree and things like this in South America and the Caribbean. Iroko, Kitembo, and Loco. This concept of the teak or the ceiba or the figueira.
The tree under which all spirits gather.
Yes, and therefore demon and angel, and whether it's Ocha or meaning Yoruba-derived systems or Fombe systems or Congolese systems, that there is this understanding of a tree under whose roots go down into the other world and are branches there, and whose branches go into heaven. And that the high gods dwell at the top, and the dead gather at the roots, and all spirits are there. That the east of the tree brings blessings, the west of the tree brings curses, and this is how you work the tree. You don't cross the shadow. You don't do, like, these kind of universal things that are seemingly apparent not only in the Afro-diasporic traditions that have come here and appropriated the use of the flora here, as they should, because those other trees are in Africa. The idea that the West African teak becomes the ceiba in the Caribbean, and the ceiba is the world tree of the Arawak and the Taino, and heavily important for the Nahua culture and the Mayan culture, and is one of the first trees created, and is represented by the caiman and the crocodile that is the first day on the calendar, and all these other things. So it like all flows together in this very beautiful way. But I also find it very interesting that, you know, this is kind of a digression, and is a talk that I hope to give at some point to a larger audience. But the idea that a world tree can be a tutelary deity or a possessory deity or a deity that can be propitiated, and especially within the Orisha and the Mpungu and the other traditions, like the Fombe, that anybody can go to this tree and make a petition, as long as you are with respect and there. He's a tricky deity universally, but that you can go to him because he's a tree. That anybody can go to the ocean and petition because it's the ocean.
Right.
So this concept of going to this, now where Tronqueira fits in, Tronqueira is also the name for the working space of Quimbanda. So Exu Tronqueira becomes, in essence, also a patron of the shrine and the stability of the shrine. And he is noted to be a very stable Exu and a guardian of the Terreiro and balancing out energies in it, exchanging bad for good and good for bad, if that's the case. He is heavily associated with Ru. He's depicted as a caboclo almost, which is interesting because it's showing a native influence and that type of understanding. The Tronqueira itself, though, is heavily connected to things like the what is called the banyan tree in the New World, but is actually a ficus like the banyan, but is in the U.S. would be the strangler figs that are down in South Florida, or they grow in Brazil as well, or the figueira tree, which is noted because it grows from the top down. It bursts its seed pods, which land in another tree or are shot out by another bird and land in a tree, and it grows and it sends roots down into the soil, and it slowly envelops the tree that was hosting it until it kills it.
Right.
And that the tree itself just keeps growing by sending down more roots. You can take one branch of it and it will plant itself and grow again. And I don't want to give all of my course goodies away, but this concept of the Tronqueira and its ability, because in some ways I was thinking about this, of like, if something starts in another tree, it's almost like I'm below ground when its roots are coming down to me. There's a different visual quality of like I'm seeing roots growing from down from a place where I should normally see branches.
Right.
So it's like still pretending that I'm underground with all these spirits, which is an interesting obsession visualization. I don't know if that's there, but
no, but it's part of that whole hourglass of a tree in both worlds and what it is in the upside down. Right.
Certainly. Tronqueira is, as far as an Exu goes, he guards the doorway. He is one of the Exus that you can sing to with Landa Porteira me doxe un sentinela. At my door, I have a sentinel, a guard. And his name is Mr. Tronqueira, or his name is Sete Portas, or his name is Sete Porteiras, or whatever Exu it is. But the Tronqueira is not necessarily the guardian of the door so much as the guardian of the whole Terreiro, and the stability of the Terreiro, and the thing which the Terreiro can firmly root itself in, which is its own thing. And there is a transmission there from initiator to initiated, that you cannot start a new Terreiro until you have permission, and you must have completed your 7 years and do all these other things. In various traditions. And the thing about Candomblé, Quimbanda, whatever it is, it's all influenced by the other religions that are there. So the structure of Candomblé is not Yoruba, but it uses most popularly Yoruba gods. So the Candomblé Nagol versions, Ketu, Yesha, these things, they have Orisha, but the house structure and the organizational structure share things with Congolese and Fombe because they were there first. So the Congolese being there first, a lot of the structure of even a Yoruba Terreiro is still going to reflect Congolese belief about how a house should be built, and not a Yoruba belief, because this is how you build a Terreiro. Right. So the idea that you can't have a Terreiro, which means yard, you cannot have a Terreiro without certain trees being present and certain sources to running water and things like that. That it's why I can't say I have a Terreiro here. Yeah. But should you have land, should you have certain trees, or at least trees that can stand in and have this other spirit invoked to them, it's like a tree standing in for a tree, standing in for a tree. Right. If we did it once, we can do it again. But this is a whole other argument with cold climate ATRs. And how do you deal with the fact that Ceiba doesn't grow outdoors here the same way? You could have a Ceiba in the house and we know it works, but there are people that have suggested everything from sycamore to walnut for a Ceiba substitute, depending on what you need it for. Yeah. But I also think if you want to go on world tree lore, you could go to rowan or ash, heavily, if it's going to be this type of.
And ash also has that thing that I think you pointed out to me, which is that it is a translation that might well just mean tree.
Yes, especially in Scandinavian. So Norwegian, I know it's definitely a thing. It's like, what is that tree? It's ash or it's oak. It's one of the two. Yeah. It's not like, it's like saying you want a Coke or a Sprite. It's just like it's cola or light.
It's what's the term? Brand. What's naming?
Yeah. Who was it that was telling me that was about this too? Of like with branding, of like the detriment that is caused by when you start having your brand name being used as a verb. So Googling something and Xeroxing something is bad.
Kleenex.
Because then anybody can use it because it's now
it's out of copyright.
So that's why you started hearing Kleenex brand tissues and Xerox brand copiers to remind people like, no, the name brand was good.
Right.
Divergent topic. But so anyway, in short, Tronqueira, he can be listed for the day and night thing. I think this is primarily a grimoire overlay. I'm very curious as to why these two are with each other. Again, half the time when these associations happen, I'm just like, seems like someone found a list and was like, let me line them up.
Right.
But Tronqueira himself is also, like, I don't believe it's in Nick's Eshu book because it's not, he's in all kingdoms and none. Much like Pimenta or some of the others. It's just it's a much harder Eshu to classify as a kingdom. Is he Das Matas? No, he's incredibly Das Almas, if anything. But he's a tree, so it becomes very difficult to play with. Caboclos Quimbanderos, fine, as a line because he's a caboclo, but he's not.
Not just a Quimbanda spirit, but a Quimbanda spirit of Quimbanda.
Yeah,
of some like mystery of the cult.
Yeah, brings peace, calmness, protects the house, the land, the property. He can be called upon to restabilize someone when unwanted possessions are happening. They used to offer eggs on the head in water in glasses and pray to him and just to draw the thing out of the person.
That stabilizing is interesting because my own work with the counterparted Verum spirit is a lot more about day and night as you wish, and is a lot more based on timing, to be honest, and some timing stuff and some things around turning things upside down and balancing. Again, that underlying humoral theory thing, that underlying day turns to night, turns to day, turns to night. That sense of keeping something in a sacred place where it was put at a particular time and nailing that time point down as well, so you can have day and night as you see fit. The idea of a save point in time, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And so, while I agree, I don't think that they're especially related. That idea of a sacred space that is only opened at certain times of night with a tronco doesn't. It reminds me of it if I was having, if we sat down and were deliberately trying to bash them together.
Yeah, what you're saying makes sense to me if I sit and think of a way to compare the two. If we're talking about turning day into night and night into day for the sake of invoking the spirits that need to be invoked during the day or the night, then the fact that Tronqueira is tied to the world tree, which controls spirits' ascent or descent, and for the fact that under the world tree, under the Sebar, under the Figueira, that there is always shade. So the spirits that need nighttime can always be in the buttressed roots, in the recesses of those roots, or under its shadow. And there's also daylight. That there is something there that's interesting. That like it's not for the sake of just doing it because,
And it's timing as well because Clistheret is part of, in most grimoire sets, is set with Masilde and Silcade, and Masilde is the traveller, can take you to wherever you're trying to get to. It's kind of the main reason why I've ended up referring to them, at least in passing, as the Rangers Guild, also because I'm a living chick tract come to life. But the idea of being able to move through space, being paired with the idea of being able to like move through time in some way, or at least take the advantages, and depending on the translation of Silcade, is something around giving dispensation in places where you might not have firm things. It looks to me like a set of spirits that all have a commonality in terms of their use for the itinerant sorcerer, someone on the move in various ways who doesn't have access to all the things.
Perhaps you're running from the last giant failure.
Right.
Or running to the next success. Let's put it in a positive spin. It calls to mind, of course, for those of us that are Meia-Noite obsessed, the Ponto Meia-Noite that talks about midnight falling on the Colunga and the forest and the crossroads. But whenever he comes, it's midnight, so he can come anytime he wants.
Right.
Because his name is Midnight. It's a pun, but also that he himself is the essence of midnight, and therefore there is an ability to turn all times become midnight when he is present.
Right. And what does it mean to be in the middle of a night?
Yeah. I have that is a sore spot for me with many. This is an Ocha rant. of not being out at 6 a.m., 6 p.m., noon, and midnight, the quarters of the day. I get it. However, when I ask people about daylight savings, and they're like, so to me it should be astrological, our old factor of zenith, nadir, sunrise, sunset in some way.
Should be actually.
And people are like, no, it shouldn't be that. It should be 6, noon, and noon. I was like, I don't mind someone saying to me that they're going to leave the tokens of noon, noon, 6, and 6 as the quarters. But if we're actually going to explore the metaphysics of it, it should be the zenith, the nadir, the sunrise, and the sunset. Period.
It's very houses of the heavens as well, right?
But with the planetary hours, that I'm not going to put you out in the middle of the day when the sun is directly overhead or the sun is directly underneath, and not when there's a transition time, the liminal time of it going into another world.
Yeah.
And sorry, that's just one of those things that I still, with all respect to my elders, although my godmother agrees with me on this one, being the astrologer that she is, of it makes more sense that it represents something. We know that the clocks were fastened like that, and because if we're reading a sundial, that's exactly what it is. But we don't all have the convenience of understanding why time is organized as it is. Things that they should teach you in school. Bring back the quadrivium and the trivium. Damn it. Okay.
It's another 7-part crossroad.
3 and 4. 3 and 4. It's all good. You can do things in small, accomplishable numbers, like 3 and 4. Don't think about all 7. Okay. So, wow, we've done a pretty good amount of time just on our first few topics. We haven't talked in a while, so we're keep bringing it in, but let's keep going.
There's an argument to talk about. Yeah, exactly.
You're just like,
tell a joke.
Segue.
Yeah. Look for a segue. There's an argument we could talk about. We've talked about a tree that strangles other trees. We could talk about the symbiotic or pseudo-symbiotic version of mistletoe. In that case, we figured that was a nice one to.
It's a nice holiday plant for sure.
Right.
My experience with mistletoe is. I'll tell the historical anecdote of what it's like to be a young child told what mistletoe is, and then thinking every bird nest you see during the winter is mistletoe.
Aww.
Because there was a clump of something, and she was like, "It's mistletoe! It's mistletoe!" It grows on the ranch, my family ranch, up near Lake Piru in California, and so I have a huge amount of it, which is always fun to be able to collect it without it touching the ground, so that I know that it's never touched the ground. It grows mostly on liquid amber trees there, which is also the tree that gets struck the most by lightning on that property.
Oh, wonderful!
There's an amazing liquid amber tree when you go right before the main gate. That's in a 3-way crossroad next to a dry well, a barn, a blacksmith shop, and a residence, which has had supposedly a lot of animals buried around it. But it's been struck by lightning. That was a lot of words. A lot of saliva. Struck by lightning 3 times. So there's char marks and a big hollow center. And it bears mistletoe. You do get it on the live oaks as the scrub oaks. But this is not as exciting. I mean, I grew up thinking an oak tree was one thing, and then I found out there's this whole other class of oak trees. And the live oaks of California are not necessarily They're very tiny little leaves with hard edges. Stepping on the leaves hurts.
The spiky guys.
It's
more like a red oak.
It's not flat like a red oak. It's a lot of people are like, those aren't oaks, and it's because they carry their leaves year round. So they're called live oaks for that reason. Another version of them grows in the south that are also called live oaks. But they have tiny little leaves. They are great for galls. A lot of galls on them. So you get these giant galls from them. But that's what I thought, and they grow cobwebs. Grow them is the correct word. Not harbor spiders that do that. They manifest cobwebs in huge ways. But I went to a grammar school that was called Anokio, which was named for the oak trees that were prevalent in it, along with the person who owned it. It was this amazing estate with a mansion and stuff. There were lots of oak trees, so I had a lot of friendly times with oak trees. Mistletoe, I didn't know until later, was growing all over the place there too. Obviously, the main thing with mistletoe is, yes, it is a tree or a plant that grows on another plant. It can bear wood, so you can actually get wood if it's an old growth. Yeah. It's a white berry, green leaves, has the lore of Balder, and the manipulation of Loki finding the one plant that did not swear an oath to protect Balder by Frigga. So it causes the death.
Right.
And I've heard lots of lore as to this sealing with a kiss and the idea of it being tied into the Balder mythos.
Oh, really?
Whether that's true or not, I mean, who knows where Victorian things come from.
Right.
But that it is tied to this idea of peace and goodwill under the mistletoe, because never again would it kill someone like that.
Oh.
It's interestingly used in herbal medicine quite. I mean, its name means all heal. And it's a strange plant. There's a European variety and an American variety that I know of. I'm more familiar with the American because of most of my life I've known it. My experience with the European is interesting. That for me, I find it more not on the sacred oak, but on fruit trees, apple trees especially. I remember being with you at, your parents are going to kill me. I don't remember the name. The manor that we went to.
Oh yeah, is that Snows Hill?
Snows Hill.
Yeah.
That their apple orchard had mistletoe in every other tree. And it was just like, can I please take this, please? And I was like, I think we're going to get kicked out if we do anything with it. But so prevalent in fruit trees. And that was my experience in Spain as well, that it was growing in fruit trees more.
That's interesting.
And I've always been curious about that. Also, what mushrooms grow on certain trees. So, like chaga's relationship with birch and fly agaric's relationship with birch and other trees of that nature.
It's interesting, at least apples, because the idea of mistletoe as kissing because peace. And because a chord has been reached. Again, that idea I think we talked about in some other episode about handshake and kiss being a Roman way of like sealing a deal, and so it was a compact more than it was any sense of like romantic or erotic connotation. But that certainly seems nowadays to be more. I'm sure I've seen people argue you can take a clip of mistletoe and use it as an aphrodisiac. Seeing as that's
it's always tied to fertility, right? Yeah, right. And even the idea of like the spear being launched that kills Balder is a phallic.
If it's a dart, then that's exactly what Cupid uses as well.
Exactly,
that's the same, down to the same word. Yeah.
So it's and that Hodur is blind, right? The god that launches the spear, the idea that Loki influences Hodur to do this. And Cupid being blind and all these other things. It's interesting. But that mistletoe makes up for its part in the murder by being a symbol of peace and friendship and fertility after that point. Yeah. But it's interesting that you mentioned, because the Roman sign of peace, we were always taught in CCD that it was for checking for a dagger. So it was grabbing up to the elbow, because this is where you sheathe the dagger. So pax was to say, I don't bear a weapon. There are no weapons on me. I'm not here to kill you. And that similarly, a kiss was to show that you didn't poison the person, that I will take of your saliva as well. So even the lips where the poison would be kept. The funny thing is you can transmit poison with a kiss. Anybody who's seen Game of Thrones, because that's historically accurate. I still want dragons. Oh,
it's totally a trope of not quite femme fatales, but of whether it's a sci-fi or a fantasy setting, some kind of sorceress bestowing poison by a kiss.
I think it's also a little bit of manipulation, right, with mistletoe. Of like, I remember reading the coercion factor of, the joke that's in like every sitcom from the 80s and later of a little boy going around with mistletoe and holding it over every girl he sees, that you have to kiss him, and that bad luck will befall you and you'll be infertile originally, but now it's just like, now you're gonna get bad luck, and it's like, now it's just like, okay, whatever, right? It's the fruit of polyamory at this point, but
that coercion, that forcing of it is interesting, especially in light of its forceful nature as it grows off a host. I always forget, because biologists are quite specific about what counts as a true parasite versus a true symbiote, because it doesn't necessarily does it expressly harm the host? I forget.
It's a hemiparasite.
There we go. So it does leech, but
I'm going off here of like herbal school memory as opposed to I just know that it has drupes and it's a hemiparasite.
Okay.
It does not have seeds, it has drupes. But it is not a full parasite the same way.
The same way that something that would kill its host outright.
Yeah, I just know it won't kill the host outright. It's not like a figata, which is doesn't really tap into the tree the same way, but like that takes over and kills the tree. But it is its own thing. I also find the connection in a lot of modern writings about traditional witchcraft that it is the corresponding plant to mandrake. That mandrake is the crown of hell, and mistletoe is the crown of heaven because it never touches the ground. So there is a parallel between that. And certainly from the Iberian lore I've studied, it does hold a place. It has, obviously mistletoe is hugely celebrated in British lore, especially with the Norse inheritance, the northern inheritance, and the Victorian class perpetuating the growth of mistletoe, like saving mistletoe by like deliberately allowing crops to grow on trees so that you can harvest it and sell it at wintertime, and get your working class kiss in.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's something wholly interesting about that. That the dragon in the ground and the serpent in the tree, all of these things that are parallels. If you're wondering about a quality in the sound differences, because we took a cookie break when the doorbell rang.
It's vital.
Mama needs more sangria. Who are you people and what are you doing in my living room? All right. Also of note.
Oh, the mistletoe is also the actual golden bough.
Yes.
For which Fraser names the book. And as you just pointed out, the silver branch is apple. So again, we have that notion of oak and apple both having this kind of association with it of sorts.
I find, first off, Fraser, read the 13 volumes. It's worth it, not the abridged.
Yeah.
There's a lot of one-line lore that you do not get in the abridged version. That's like, oh, and the random people in this town do blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's worth, at least if you're not familiar with Fraser, you should be. I will be that snot and says that Fraser, at least in passing.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Fraser changed how people thought about magic.
Well, it creates a whole set of not even criteria. The
metrics and the descriptions of
terminology
things of contagion and sympathy, as which aren't his originally, but to put them back into the parlance again. Yeah. In addition to, although I disagree, and most modern magicians would disagree with his evolutionary time theory of magic evolves into religion, but he allowed for magical thought to be a valid thing and not a thing of superstition, which in post-Protestant Reformation era predominant cultural lens is a revolutionary thing to insert magic back in as a possibility. Now, he does give it through a slightly superstitious, like it's a superstition here, or it may have been an explanation of this, because he's still lodged within the paradigm of his time.
Sure.
You know, he's still swimming in his own waters. But the documentation of folklore in that way, and also it's a huge effect upon Gardner and the concepts and what became the neo-pagan revival and then became so much of what we think of in the West as alternative spirituality now is heavily tied to that. Not to mention is one of the main inspirations behind Apocalypse Now.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, of course, Heart of Darkness.
And he's reading it at the end. Golden Bough is there. And the sacrifice of the Rex Nemorensis, that in order to become king, you must kill the current king. And that anybody who's a fan of the Wicker Man will see the influence of Golden Bough thought based upon that time period. It 50 years, 80 years into the future, reaching those thoughts. And that, especially if you like Wicker Man, the chants come out of death, the Golden Bough.
Yeah.
We carry death out of the village is another culture.
Yeah.
You know, he's just pulling things.
He reifies
Robin,
a whole set of tropes, right?
Yes.
From the Fisher King onwards that may have been present in some form, and that's also why the analysis.
Carry death out of the village. We carry death out of the village.
And on that branch there was a etc.
And you had the beer? What? This?
Yeah,
which I made fun of you for, but
it's fine. It's
jolly good humor.
It's not solely from
it is
from
not.
That. Corn rigs and barley rigs is not exclusively or invented for the Wicker Man.
Bobby Burns, Robert Burns, the origin of the haggis myth.
A wee timorous beastie.
2 legs shorter than the other. Stands on hills. But and then some people had some great alternative suggestions on that. But yeah, You did it beautifully.
You did it beautifully. Yeah, Ejaculation of Serpents.
Ejaculation of Serpents.
Great name for it.
Which is my Skype handle. Just putting it out there. I already claimed it. Okay, so we're actually doing pretty good on this. This feels a little bit more like we have to get through these points, which we learned in the Candlemas episode, which still has not been put up before the time of this recording, which will all happen this week. It will have to. We'll hire people.
Yeah.
We learned that we can't just, we have to sometimes say no and move on, because the Candlemas episode was like 7 hours long total. We had to break it into two. But okay,
it's apt that we're preparing for Candlemas at this time, though. That was how we kind of started talking about Lucy
absolutely.
and things. And that concept of taking the thing done now and then applying it to Candlemas is great. It was, you were saying about Epiphany, and that's also a feature I was reading up on like King's Cake ceremonies. For this Magi
How were you?
thing.
I would never have known this.
It's not like it's mostly what I talk about now. But the idea of whoever gets the baby J or the father bean or whatever it is, amongst other responsibilities that then brings, like
the baby J. Really, we reduced him to a letter.
That's where I'm going with that. Yeah.
Okay, go on.
Yeah.
Whoever gets the baby J or the fava bean
either has to host the next King's Cake party or has to take candles to the church at Candlemas.
Yes.
And has to lead that thing there.
And if you are, like in Mexican tradition with it too, if you get the baby Jesus, the baby Jota, that you dress, you sometimes a baby Jesus is passed around the family, and the person who gets the baby Jesus gets the 18-inch carved wood baby Jesus that is then dressed in Candlemas robes when that's the public presentation of Mary after her purification, all this other stuff. Because we talked about this with the Epiphany thing of like the circumcision of the Jesus. Wow. Of Santo Niño is
a Jesus? No, the Jesus.
The Jesus. That's right. Definite article. So many languages. Anyway. No, there is something really interesting that, again, the parallel with Agatha's feast at the beginning of Candlemas, and Lucy being the patron, and Lucy coming in on the dragon, leaving on the dragon, and like, is the dragon three-headed? Yes, he is, because there's 3 kings, God damn it. I don't care if the Bible doesn't say there's 3 kings. It's not 12-headed dragon. It's a 3-headed dragon. Okay. So we've got these things. I think, let's talk a little bit about geomancy and Odú here, because I think there's something interesting with the turn of the year here that it's going to come in somehow.
So here's my link, right? One of the main things that we find in the discussion of the law of the star that leads the Magi in this time is the way that it makes them rejoice. And there is a model of 5-fold rejoicing, which boils down to the star turned up in various ways, not just in the sky to lead them, but it also is identified as the angel that tells the kings to leave at that point and go home via a different route, or however the translation of that works. So that the star turns up at 5 different points in the story, and at each point they rejoice greatly, they rejoice ever so greatly, and it's this kind of building upon joy upon joy.
Is it connected to the angel that appears to Joseph in the dream for them to go to Egypt?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's identified as Gabriel in a lot of places, so I don't know as much about the Joseph angel, or at least the links with the Epiphany angel, which is man-shaped for a variety of other reasons. So one of the pieces of that lore around that Epiphany and 3 Magi stuff is directly connected to joy. There's a beautiful prayer from either one of the 9th or the 12th century Anglo texts. I should footnote myself. There's a beautiful prayer which mainly operates as a historiola of just
you better reference yourself before you wreck yourself.
Before I reference myself. There's a beautiful historiola that just as the Magi were led to Christ, so and Christ received the gifts, so we are led to God, and God will receive our prayers. And the thing that is asked for is joy, and joy in life and in the service of God, and those kinds of things. But joy is this big important thing for them. It's a whole set of the things that allow them retroactively a variety of church fathers to find previous prophecy in the Old Testament to back this up, that upon these signs there was great rejoicing, is like not an uncommon refrain, funnily enough. And there's also ideas around spiritual joy being its own conception within medieval and later early modern passional theory, that just as there is this model, as along with the idea of the veil of tears that is the world, and that we are suffering in order to earn our place in heaven, and all that good stuff that Protestant work ethic certainly like digs its heels into. There's also a notion that the soul itself requires a sustenance, and the sustenance of the soul is spiritual joy, and that it's not just necessary for us to worship or go on arduous pilgrimage or those kind of things, but there's actually a sense of some goodness that is felt, that the rational faculty of the soul, which is crucially how it's usually distinguished, that there's the passing joy that the sensitive faculties of the soul can perceive. Your dog can wag its tail when you pat it on the head and show it attention and give it food and treats and things, but you are moving beyond that animalistic part of the soul when you are a good rational Christian in this medieval model, and are able to experience a higher gradation of joy. And so there's this interesting kind of whether or not we want to see that as an annexing by a church of a particular passional state, but it's also an argument that ends up becoming relevant when people start talking about enthusiasm in the early modern period, and the idea of prophets and visionaries and people becoming inflamed with the Holy Spirit in various forms. So all that is to say that there's a great deal to be said about joy, which also happens to be one of the names of a geomantic figure, the figure under Ismael and Jupiter, of the other hand being Acquisitio. So we have that notion of Jupiterian gain and an expansion, but then on the other hand we have what is jovial, what is joyous, and joy being especially associated with the sanguine temperament, which is known for being very agreeable. It's represented by the sanguine humour, which is contained within blood, but blood also as the voluminous, expansive, good mixture carries all the other humours as well. So we have this notion of drawing it as a good mixer, perhaps too good a mixer. That shadow side of the sanguine temperament is meant to be that it's overly seedy or lascivious or salubrious or kind of oily or greasy. Like all these haptic analogies still work, as I'm sure I've banged on about before. So Laetitia and Joy have all these other Jupiterian mysteries that aren't necessarily about being big and throwing lightning or holding a cornucopia. They're the effects of that gain, we can think about it as, or they're the fleeting joy, often associated with Pisces, not exclusively but often. And I like the idea of joy as being a ripple, and being the two fish passing each other, and the vortices that are created in those moments, and the imagination as a medium through which passions are transmitted is a very, very old and important notion in at least European occult philosophy and magical practice. It's the flip side of catching people's nightmares, or the evil eye. What is moved through. You don't just vent those humours into the air, or if you do, the air itself is a medium. There is a fluid dynamic to contagion, and that idea of joy's watery nature is interesting, because it's the figure itself of Laetitia is 1 dot, 2 dots, 2 dots, 2 dots. So
rainbow.
Yeah, an arch. I like the notion of it as a wedding arch as well. That idea of the wedding as the happiest day of one's life, kind of thing. They've all been that for me so far.
All three of them. I think it's one to revisit the concept of joy on its own level, with talking about Christian notions of joy before I lose too much of our audience. The definition of sin as separation or alienation from God, that is self-selected but still has dire repercussions upon the physic of the body and the spirit.
Right, a moral nosology to the cosmos.
The concept that being in proximity to God, increasing in devotions and sacramentals and participating in the sacraments, brings you closer to God and therefore brings you joy. That one can be in control of the joy in their life, and often requires not just sacrifice in the normal sense of it, but a a decided effort to participate in the things that provide that closeness or are said to provide that closeness. Certainly the real repercussions of, I think it's interesting to add into that what is often called making law in some cultures, but keeping up appearances or what have you, that faking it till you make it sometimes actually has an effect.
Oh yeah, those experiments around getting people to, not even asking them to smile when they don't mean it, asking them to hold a pencil between teeth and form their mouth into using the muscles one would use to smile, but not even framing it to a blind test of an audience, of asking them to smile. Yeah, it's in I want to say Richard Wiseman's his one of his books that is that combination of debunking self-help and also alternative self-help stuff based off debunking them.
The idea, I mean, one of the, I will say this, and I will regret saying it in this way, of course, but I think one of the greatest detriments to Western concepts of mind and community and body is the misunderstanding of individuality. This holding how everybody is unique and important and special and should be king and queen and rule the world in this way, mistaking potential for result, as well as the concept of individuality is not universal. Joseph Campbell went into this in huge ways in talking about just mythic patterns of the concept of an individual, even in a family, is unheard of in the East. It is not part of Eastern identity. That the Greeks mythologically heavily perpetuate this idea of the hero, that you can stand out from your family, stand out from your upbringing, and become an individual. And in the West, we're all assumed now to be individuals from the beginning. Partially, I think, so that we don't have to, share resources and be our brother's keepers.
That hero point is also interesting in terms of you being an expression of family. In Greek terms, of most heroes are some form of demigod, or at least touched by the divine in some apparatus. Also interesting because they aren't necessarily attempting to enact a great good. They're that. I don't like the term culture hero because I think it doesn't really mean anything, or it doesn't end up meaning anything. It's a bizarre placeholder for a concept. But Odysseus isn't trying to like make the world a better place. He's just trying to get home, right? So he doesn't even have this notion of the hero as superhero as upholding or instantiating a moral good.
Batman versus Superman. There's also the added factor in there too, that just in hearing that, we often say, oh, they're demigods, but the attitude about this, I believe, is probably exemplified by many extant cultures, where when someone does something profound that has an impact, then we consider them an evidence of the divine.
It's the other way around,
and
right?
We say, oh, that Caesar was descended from Venus. His family, the Kaisers, were descended from Venus. Yes, that is part of the thing. But in his swaying of the masses and getting away with shit that no one should have gotten away with, he was a brilliant general. You'd think he'd be a child of Mars. But there was also the fact that he was persuasive, and this is a Venusian art. So it only upholds the fact that some of that Venusian blood must have gotten into him.
Right. And that kind of appeal to gods or spirits or planets, it becomes a descriptor rather than a proscription.
And also it puts the specificity in that allows a broader application past the immediate repercussions of that individual's life events. Meaning it's now mythologized and canonized, and we learn about it the same way that in Odú, that you're going to repeat a story. You don't know if it was a devotee of that deity, if the deity was one of his earthly manifestations, or someone who was just initiated to that deity, and that becomes that Orisha, that spirit, living its life, and we have now a lesson about how they acted very Shango-like, or very Obatala-like, or very Eshu-like, and now we have codified the story and perpetuated because there was some wisdom in it. And I think that, I've become very conscious of how I viewed Greek myths, because the way that I was introduced to them was through a very British lens, the very kind of resurrection of Roman Greek religion through a British lens, the white marble statues. Let's go back to that.
Yep.
Undyed white marble, very pristine, very anthropomorphized.
Because it's all white.
Let's not forget, lest we forget, the Greeks are an Oriental culture to the Romans. They were considered on par with the Turks, the Middle Easterns, the Afghanis, and the Indians. They were Eastern. They are Oriental. They did not have as the civilization of the pull of the Western Europeans, the potential. They weren't as barbaric as the native Celts and the Gauls and all these other people. But the Romans saw themselves as the center of the world, and they took what they could from the Greeks, but they also acknowledged there was a lot of shit they didn't want to take from the Greeks.
Yeah.
That they were barbarians, and that they didn't understand how things went. And the Egyptians, for all of their stuff, first off, the empire was crumbling of Egypt at the time, but, they helped that. And it was Greek-ruled at the time. So this concept of, Alexander was with Persians and did all this Egyptian blood mating and all these other things, it becomes, we have to remember that Greek culture is not as pristine and, I'm saying this next to a Brit, so I'm very self-conscious of this, but it's not as British as the myths are presented to me in my childhood, in my readings.
Oh, sure.
And also the static nature of it, which has infected, because of the biblical impulse of, even with the contradictions of the Bible, that what is here must be true. So if this deity is listed as a daughter or a son of this other deity and it's conflicted somewhere else, one of them's wrong. As opposed to both are true. It's a myth. Learn from both. Or maybe there's multiple manifestations, but who knows? But this idea that we have now tainted our study of other traditions and cultures with our own paradigms. If you don't know what you're changing or what you're limiting when you're studying something, go back and read it again after you've studied it for 10 years.
A magical text is that which changes when you read it again.
Yeah, which all texts. I will go back to what we always say about all text, all reading is necromantic. Not just if the author is dead, but the fact is that they wrote something and that conversation is dead. It is contained, and we can read it and we can better ourselves, and that's wonderful. At the same time, it is us breathing life into the dry bones of that book, and I love this concept that the parallel in Semitic language, Arabic and Hebrew and Aramaic, that the consonants are written and the vowels are what is God nature. So when you are breathing, you know how to construct the universe again because you know what vowels need to go into those words. So you're only writing the consonants for a reason. So you are reanimating the original intent through the dry bones, through the dry earth, through the pigment itself, which was made from earth or ash or whatever it is, to bring it back to life. The act of reading is necromantic. The act of necromancy is by itself, even reading it, especially reading it out loud, giving voice to the unvoiced. The notions of breath, voice, and speech. Breath, voice, and word, let's say, as parallels to salt, sulfur, mercury, and certain schools of Kabbalah. I just covered my mouth when I said that, so it sounded like I mumbled. But anyway. Going back, the power of the word. If I can segue that back to Laetitia.
Oh, heck yeah. And
its corresponding Odú. Obará is complex. It is associated with many proverbs. From them, the king does not lie. The king does not lie is an important one, because even in the parallels or the in-depth examination of that Obará thinks itself higher than everyone else because it's the king. But in such, the king does not lie sounds like an admonition to the king to not tell the truth, or that he has to tell the truth, excuse me.
Yeah.
And in truth, it can also show the other side of it, which is the king cannot lie because the king creates what truth is.
Right.
The king sets the law.
The emperor's new clothes.
Exactly. So let's acknowledge the fact that both possibilities are there. So what is joy? Joy is finite. The being on top with no support, because if we think about the pictogram of it in that nature, which I know not everybody agrees with it, but that it's active and then passive, passive, passive. That it's resting on nothing. It's atop of its game, but it has nothing to support it.
Oh yeah, it's active fire.
Yeah,
and passive everything else.
It's a flame without a candle.
Right.
And the flame is having fun, but it takes a lot to maintain that flame. And Obará speaks a lot about the need to wag the tongue, especially to keep that flame going. That Obará rules interaction and commerce and the internet and things like that, this constant exchange that keeps things heated. And it can bring joy. It can also bring extreme the tongue can build a civilization, the tongue can destroy a civilization. This idea that you can take everything down with the tongue. You can build up mala fama e fama, that bad fame and fame are still fame. That you can turn it around. But the idea that Obará people and the energy around it can mistake itself for the most important thing when it's in an afflicted side. So you think and you create your own reality and you blame everyone else for it, that it's not matching up. Or you could be an amazing leader and be out there and be the sun in the sky that people are worshiping. But the sun sets too. The arc of the sun is this pictogram.
Right.
So there's this interesting thing of like kings. Most people have bright points in their life. You know, we joke about the people that have their highlight in high school, but like most people, I think it is in the middle of their life. The prime of their life hits, and they're hitting their stride. They're doing the things they want to do. They have children. And they start putting that into their children's ascent into the sky, and that's one way of doing it. But the notion that you must interact is Obará. The Obará is the tongue as well. This wagging, this nature of that. It's the liver and these other things too. But I just find that interesting that it is so connected to how to be a good king and how to be a terrible king. And it's like, you know, The Prince was written in jest, half in jest. We know that. But it is, what it does is it acknowledges this is how the world works. Right. And one of the things that I will say I'm always impressed with Yoruba cosmology is it doesn't downplay how the world works. Christianity, one of its faults that I've always felt is that it tries to replace the reality of the world with its own ideal.
With some shoulds. Which
is lovely. You know, you tell a 4-year-old that they shouldn't hit people. And we know that that's not necessarily the truth as an older, but you can't impress complex logic. It's like, well, there's cases where you do hit them and cases where you don't. Or cases where you don't, absolutely. Maybe you just like turn all swords into plowshares, but that's not how modern Christianity works anyway. It becomes this cycle where we think that people have our best interests at heart when we know that they don't. We can allow for that, but they don't. We know the world runs on gossip and intrigue. We know it does.
What was the thing you were saying about the number of remedies in Ifa for, Ifa, infamously attempts to cover everything.
Yeah.
Right, and can seek, potential remedies for any situation. And you were saying at least in one compilation of these remedies, which can be anything from, lifting the grief of a broken heart to, physical stuff in the world, like, gathering money.
Gathering money, keeping an erection, having your son's health be better,
Right. All of these things, but the amount of them being like overwhelmingly about avoiding gossip or ensuring a good reputation.
Absolutely.
And the sacredness of a good reputation.
And certainly good character is its own thing in Lukumi, and it's interesting the concept of when you're accused of bad character, that's when you have to prove your good character by acting in good character. That's not when you go back and retaliate and blah, blah, blah. You're like, you know what? You can talk whatever you want about me.
Right.
Your opinion does not matter. I'm going to keep doing my thing. Which is a big emphasis in how the advice is given a lot of times. Of like, do your thing.
Telling people how cool you are is not usually a marker of cool people.
Yes, and let's go into that's a whole other concept. Facebook. There's a blog post that I still have to publish on that, the concept of araye and problems of the world and the distractions from you polishing your own crown, maintaining your kingship.
Right.
But maintaining a kingdom is hard. Staying at the top with no support, you have to create your support. And how do you do that? You get someone else to launch you into the air constantly. It's like keeping the ball in the air. It's like the parachute silk with the got to keep bouncing that person so that they keep floating. And a good king can do that. A good ruler can do that. But in short spurts most of the time. And it's all interesting with the distractions we talked about, the blindness. How do you manipulate? How do you do those things? Like the idea that I'm struck with. I remember there was a point. I think I've talked about this with you before. It was late in my life, for like 8 or 9. Where I realized that, oh my God, everyone else thinks they're right too. And the sheer audacity of like, oh my, how is anybody getting anything done?
Right.
Because everyone thinks they're right. And that's terrifying, but also a similar thing of like, everyone thinks they deserve to be king. There are people that are naturally supportive of people who are more dominant, and that's its own thing. I'm not saying that, but it's everyone thinks they're the star of the story, and sometimes you're not for a little bit.
Right.
This concept we talked about is like, maybe your destiny in life is to be there at that one point to make sure that dog crossed the street to get the message back. Who knows what your destiny in life is supposed to be? I can't speak to it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the most important thing you'll ever do, and you didn't know that.
No.
So it's I don't know. It's just it's such an interesting
that
thing.
itself. Yeah. I mean that can. I like the idea of that being an exhortation of, especially if you're prone to self-doubt or devaluing your own work, that you don't know what's going to be useful. You don't know what the ripples are going to be of your actions, which can be taken as an exhortation to attempt to act well in as many situations as you can.
And conversely, to treat others well, because in that I keep tapping the desk in emphaticism, and I'm sorry you're going to hear it like a thump. It is so frustrating, right? How do you weigh when someone has potential, but they're not using it? You can't, at certain times you can decide that this is not a good use of my time, but that's not personal. Like, this person needs to move on from my tutelage or my advice. But there's also the side of it that is, you don't know what's going to bring someone to enlightenment in that kind of Vajrayana way of like, do I give up on this person? Like, this person's a complete idiot, and people are like, don't waste your time, because past experience will show that type of person is not good for your time. But you don't know what you say might be the thing that all of a sudden they're like, I'm kind of wasting people's time by asking them these stupid questions. Looking for recognition, let's call it.
Right.
We got a very strange request for a message approved in a group that we manage, which is Folk Necromancy on Facebook. You should join it. There's good conversations going in there. It is intended to be both a platform for Radio Free Golgotha advertisements when we have a new episode, but really it's to talk about death, the dead, and the dying, and the cultural traditions that are around that, and to encourage discussion, healthy discussion, not so much debate, but and talking around this topic, and also to get it out of books, to understand the value of oral tradition, to have both extant and extinct be talked about, and to have hypothetical all be talked about. That aside, someone came in with a fairly entertaining proposal, and
unintentionally entertaining. I made a post about it, saying that it may surprise, which it probably shouldn't, that running a necromancy group on the internet occasionally affords us a certain insight into a particular kind of crazy, a particular
dark,
dark fluff word salads.
They don't pronounce their R's. They're like you. Dark. So dark.
It's like another shadow of Empire. The Empire.
Someday you're going to have an American accent and I'm going to be really confused.
Oh, no. I hope not.
Oh, okay, then we'll work against that.
It's probably something I'm going to have to start cultivating should your president continue.
Ugh. You're president too. You married an American.
No.
Oh, okay. So, moving on from that. Yes, that just president. You can't bring up the president, and it's like a fart in the room.
Right. Speaking of,
if you don't know our political leanings, you just found them out.
Right. Speaking of bad kingship.
I mean, come on. I'm a gay alternative religion, like half minority. Like, I don't think he has my best interests at heart. I understand that there's finance and things like that, but whatever. Anyway, bad king.
Bad kings, and the idea that, again, for those who are listening and don't really have any context for Odú, I think it's probably worth pointing out that you get both the when you go for a reading, the sign that falls is not simply the sign in all of its multiplicity. It's also divined, usually, as I understand it, and as I've experienced, between it coming in its blessings, in a good and useful, healthy form of that that figure, that energy, that set of patterns, those lessons, those stories, to help you achieve what you're trying to do, and not blessings, shall we say? The idea of it coming in detriments or warnings, or straight up that you are doing something harmful to yourself or others or the world, and so that idea of the power of the tongue is actually kind of a good one to go into for people who don't regularly get deal of good readings or what have you, or are involved in the religion, and I like that concept of it. And it's not just coming in reversal. Like, it's not just that, these things are all inverted in some way, necessarily. It's that the same tongue that builds the empire can destroy an empire as well. And I think that's something that can be glommed onto pretty easily. The power of words is powerful, and how we use that is then kind of up to us, and certainly should be our responsibility.
Yeah, I think the energy comes as a flowing advancement or a stagnation and an impediment to what you need to do ultimately, and what gets in your way. and the stone in your shoe, or how the Satanas. So, if things are flowing well and there's nothing new at the time, then great. Blessings are flowing, and that's what it is, and this is the energy going you, and you're enjoy your enjoyness. Which is manifesting on the bad side. This could be vanity and lack of touch with reality, and not seeing who's being deceitful around you, and not realizing that people are hearing your words and you're trashing your own empire or another. The readings will qualify this further, because it's a complex divination system, and there's other things that qualify it. But I find this, even applying that to how divination is explored in general.
Yeah. The
concept of joy. The joy is linked to a concept of permanence, right? If we're going off a Kantian, is it Kantian idea behind that?
Spinoza
talks
about that a lot more. The idea
permanence
of because it's part of perfecting for Spinoza.
So linked to the notion of it being a permanent thing now in your life, and this allowing for an enjoyment, which is very difficult, of course, because when you're a child, this is the end of the world when your balloon pops, because you don't have the experience to back it up that you'll have another balloon, or life goes on.
Yeah, there's the Keats thing, the line about bursting joy's grape upon the palate. That's the perpetual struggle of framing joy in terms of permanence, is that it's found in its impermanence. It's found in its fleeting nature. That as soon as you sit and think about how happy you are, you're not necessarily as happy anymore. It's the stolid qualities of melancholy lend themselves much better to the black ink spilled upon page.
It's perfect for this. The maintaining the ball in the air, not dropping the ball, actually takes. You can't rest on your laurels. That even, this idea that is very prevalent in the work with Jetchi, the theater group I'm with, of every moment can nurture or deplete you. And it's just a shift in perspective on how you do that. At a certain point, that doesn't mean that you have to be a martyr and go through, this is depleting me and now it's nurturing me, because even by observing depletion, it is now doing something different. It's not just a pulling out of all your energy. There's now something feeding you from it. But at a certain point, you can also say, it's my choice to walk away from this. However, this idea of keeping the ball in the air and maintaining it, this is a difficult thing. Joy has to be maintained. You can't just collect all your crops one year and be like, I never have to do farm work again.
Right.
It ties into the St. Nicholas factor of like, why does Krampus come? Because you didn't spend your year being a good boy and harvesting your crops, and now you're not going to make it through the winter. So the coal's actually a blessing, because you're going to need something to put in your fireplace, because you don't have any resources left, you dipshit. But that's my own take on that.
And there's that comedy fantasy undercuttings of, well, actually coal is coal and useful. The more diamonds you make out of coal, the more you devalue the diamond market.
Dead people to diamonds all the way. No, but it's interesting, the link between Laetitia and Obará in that way. If we think of joy as something that must be maintained, and certainly there's the cultural lenses of what joy is, what makes joy, for Yoruba mindset of children, property, stability, health, this type of thing of like, is everything stable in that way?
And that you get that with looking through, the geomantic descriptions of the figure of Laetitia in the different houses. And it frustrated me when I was looking at this in my doctorate on magical approaches to the emotions.
You're a doctor?
Like, great. Yeah, I don't. I just try not to mention it too much. But the
Sorry, doctor. Sorry, doctor.
That's magenta, right?
No. That's Audrey.
Oh, of course.
Suddenly see more
Bless.
standing beside me.
It's the other horror musical.
Yeah, it is the other horror musical. It's a horror.
The instances aren't generally actually talking about the subjective state of joy in that thing. They're not, joy in the second house is not, you will acquire some kind of expensive thing that reminds you of something in childhood, and that's why you're happy. No, it's happy because wealth. It's a thumbs up to a lot of like good things, right? The happiness is not finding joy in being applied to a job that fulfills you and offers you, mastery, autonomy, and purpose, right? In the sixth, it's that you're going to get a sweetheart deal and not have to do too much heavy lifting. It's that kind of concept, and so the thing doesn't actually end up referring to the state itself. It refers to the situations, like you're gonna have loads of kids, you're gonna have a great inheritance. I think that's one of them. I might be getting this wrong.
It's totally it brings up to mind the Picasso quote about creativity, which I love. But that inspiration will come, but it has to find you working. It's kind of one of those things of like, joy will come, but it has to find you doing the things that bring joy.
Right. You can enchant for it, but it's
like if all you do is sit there and stab rabbits, eventually you're going to find joy in stabbing rabbits. Like that's your only option, right? Like,
yeah, and you're going to have good days for that and bad days. Yeah, it's interesting, huh?
Well, it brings to mind this kind of very magical thinking, pre-modern thinking, or perhaps early modern thinking. I'll give that credit. But that the things there are things that radiate joy by their nature. And I know we say money doesn't cure all ills, but money in the huge opulent amounts of wealth that we talk about now is very rare. I mean, like, happiness can be, or joy can be, the absence of sorrow.
Yeah.
Which sorrow will have to create new ways to invade your life because it is a necessary balance.
Yep.
But the absence of ordinary amounts of sorrow is a form of joy, even if you are not joyous. That there is an accumulation of joy wealth.
Yeah. I like that very much.
That the cornucopia itself, filled with food. You don't have to worry about food anymore? Done. Joyous.
Yeah.
How joyous. I will be merry and ponder all these things in my heart. Or I will be the wise man and rejoice greatly.
I think about that Piscean nature of joy, of Laetitia, if you run your stars through your figures like that, but the Aquarian nature of sorrow, of Tristitia, and the fact that sorrow as a geomantic figure is stable, very much pointing down. Joy is very much pointing away. Joy is the fleeting one. Those fishes that are silvery in the ripples and gone again, and sorrow is stable is the term it's usually used, unmoving, but
it's going with gravity,
right, but it's also Aquarian, and so this notion of like the great creativity of our sadnesses, always finding a way, and I like that notion as well of that against the pit that is dug as opposed to the arch that is of the thing constantly kept up in motion. That's really great. I like that very much, and especially that joy wealth connects back to Jupiter again.
Certainly. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the Piscean nature of it, and to me it has a lot of Sagittarius, which is Jupiterian in its nature of like the amiability, and there is. I almost always want to break down Laetitia into, and I do mean Laetitia here, of like how there's greater fortune and lesser fortune. That there are. It's good to hear the breakdown of. These are things that can bring joy. You should be joyous. It doesn't mean you are joyous. It could be a depressed person, get a lot of Laetitia, and it just means that you have a good job and a good, stable marriage.
Or that you keep hoping for things that are unreasonable. That's
Odú
Obará.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the other classic. Laetitia in a
that you are trying to create the world in your own image, and you are not. The two worlds are not overlapping.
Yeah.
Which will bring a downfall, which is a potential, right? Yeah. That the lies can bring the truth. The lies will expose the truth. The lies you tell yourself will come out in the end. So, the king does not lie, but the king is not always king. There are repercussions to our words and the way the tongue flows. Which is interesting because, I mean, if we talk about that and the side of it, we are linking it to judgment in some way, which is the tarot card we selected for the day, right? That there are repercussions for actions. And although there is a more doomsday, judgment day, Armageddon type of
oh sure, it becomes the aeon,
the judgment,
right?
But there is something very interesting, like, can all your lives' actions be summoned up to, like, do you get raptured or not, if we're going non-biblically and popularly, or do you go to heaven or not? And this idea of
will you rise like Dracula facing the east,
absolutely
pivoted on your feet,
bury me standing up. But this notion of judgment, of being judgmental of others, is a huge thing in Obará, of being overly critical because you're seeing fault everywhere else, in analyzing everything because you're good at analyzing all those little things that are going on. The Facebook people, like, look at the trend on Facebook, of course, of the bitching bandwagon. Like, somebody gets something said about them, and even if it's somewhat relevant to what you're saying, you're trying to point something wrong with a specific line in text. I hate that author. They do this. This is like, I'm not talking about the author in general. I'm talking about this one line of text. Or this person did something stupid. Yes, I hate that person. I hate the other people around him. Like, okay, because it's easy to bitch. It's easy to join it. It's an avalanche or a snowball of something going on there. It's there is that the tongue wagging is so difficult. And also and how to harness mala fama, how to harness bad or notoriety, and realize that that's just as easy to turn around. It's still having people talk about you,
right,
and they can lift it. I mean,
the only thing
our current president is a master of spin,
right,
which politics resides on, which is keeping people in power, like modern day kings,
keeping the ball in the air again.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, if I wanted to sum it back, because we are almost at 2 hours, which means we should wind it down. The only two things we haven't talked about on our list: Amethyst and Casanova. Amethyst is interesting because of the sobriety required that's associated with it, right? So that it helps one recover from alcohol inebriation,
or makes one immune to alcohol, which is a subtly different form of, like, I don't think about that in terms of sobriety. I think about that in terms of being capable of imbibing poison and walking away. So not about like being somber, for instance, or sober, so much as almost a Dzogchen kind of take on.
Yeah, it is, when you say Dzogchen in that way of like remembering friends that were talking and asking their lamas about, can I drink and keep in the right mindset, right mind, right speech, everything. Is like, if you're observing yourself and the effects it has on your body, your consciousness, and your actions, yes. The minute you're not able to discern that anymore, then you need to stop and you need to take a step back. So anything can nourish you or deplete you. Anything can be, this vehicle for more information. But certainly with Amethyst, I feel like we talked about it already, which is interesting. Should have checked what we've already talked about. It's just been so long. But the sobriety is what it's often used for now. And returning to soberness, which again is not the opposite of inebriation.
Yeah,
it's the absence of inebriation.
Yeah.
Which already, even in our modern mindset, we sometimes go too far and be like, oh, they're very sober of thought. Yes, they're in their right mind. Doesn't mean they're thinking well or that they're making good decisions. Sober of thought is the ability to think on and permutate on your thoughts, extrapolate and think.
And this makes me think of the polarity between Rubius and Albus. The idea of Albus being like supposedly scholarly and solitary, and is off into the realm of logic and that which can be a priori'd. But the as opposed and Rubius is the poison and the toxicity and the impassioned thing that like carries you away from yourself. But that doesn't mean that Albus is as you say, just because it's sober doesn't mean it's thinking well. And there's a madness in that sterility. Is how I think Greer puts it, which is also to be avoided, not just because you'll become a Vulcan, but precisely because we're not designed to be Vulcans, and that produces its own dysfunctions. And
it goes back to the notion of chastity, for me, which in grade school they were very CCD, at least Catholic education about chastity is not the same as virginity. And when preserving chastity, you're talking about right use of sexual energy. So mystics can take this and say, if I don't sleep with other people, this circulates inside me and leads me to an ecstatic state when I think about God or the devil or whatever it is chaste. That a husband and wife trying to bear children is a chaste form of that expression of sexual energy. Now I'm not going to go into the right or wrong of that, but the notion of expanding a choice in how our sexual energy is used, as opposed to going right into animal-based instincts with it, that we expend it, that we have an urge that we satisfy, like hunger, thirst, or whatever it is. What can interrupt the pattern? But that's my own obsession with, and from Jetchi and other things, of just interrupting patterns, trying to find out what exercises humanity exercises and what exorcises it. That if we are acting as a dog, then where are we better than a dog? That this notion even of reincarnation, that you'll go into the body that you are acting like, that if you were someone who was just like fight or fuck or feed, that the dog nearby that's being reborn, that is kind of what your spirit's already aimed towards. Just go be a dog. But are you going to be the turtle that puts its head through the ring and like embraces humanity and realizes, like, the tiger that doesn't kill when it normally would? Does it hold back? Does it kill its animals quickly? Like, it's gaining a momentum over its animal instincts, which might be to shred and to tear and to do other things, which is of course a value system and a value judgment, but is an interesting overlap between, I think, older notions of what chastity truly is before this obsession with the hymen and the lack of control of male chastity, and what that means.
Right.
Basically is like, don't get anybody pregnant, no one will know, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah. Patriarchy.
Speaking of which, getting people pregnant and nobody knowing, Casanova. Look, it was a segue. First show, we're going to talk about everything without 7 hours or 8 hours. We could talk that long. I mean, as far as historical magicians go, Casanova, it's dubious as to whether we can classify him as a magician, but the fact that he kept the Picatrix on him and was charged with keeping the Picatrix is the thing that makes him notable.
Right, and it's this wider... there's so much to that.
And where was that in the Heath Ledger version?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Was it good?
Haven't seen it all the way through. I was watching it and then I found out he died and I was like, oh man.
Aww.
Anyway.
Spoilers.
Rest in peace. Rest in peace? What? Rest in peace.
In peace, like a ski resort.
Yeah.
Heaven is the ski resort.
I don't know if that... Sorry, Heath. Anyway.
This idea that, anyone who is outstanding in their field, especially in like the idea of love being magic in some way, or suspect in that manner.
It should be suspect.
Exactly. I
mean, you and I are in the same mind of this, but love magic is dirty. And people that say otherwise are lying.
Right.
It is not white magic on that scale.
No.
It's manipulative.
And I feel like this is becoming a conversation that people are more conversant with the conversation, right? No.
It's a cognitive. Yeah, sure works.
In terms of saying, in terms of pointing out how much love magic is what gets classified as erotic malefic, is about sapping someone's will, is about reverse engineering Ovidian concepts of love as a sickness of some kind, and love sickness especially being a kind of malady that can be inflicted, and either inflicting it or, as I say, reverse engineering the reality of it from its symptoms, of torturing someone to be sleepless, to only think of you, to not be able to stand or sleep or rest.
The discussion of rape saints,
right?
And the converse, the other side of like getting away from the Christian notion that the only way to use your sexuality for good is to be chaste, to be virginal, to retain it. That if you must, you can get married and have children, because that gets the butts in the seat.
Right.
But that side of it is interesting, right? That we're stuck in a paradigm still where that is so lasting. This idea of female virginity, or just of saving oneself. God's Loophole, great video. Garfunkel and Oates.
Garfunkel and Oates, yeah. The sex that God can't see.
Yeah, exactly.
The loophole, yeah.
The loophole itself and the irrational rationalization.
Yeah.
Anyway, go watch it. This idea of that we're still stuck in, that the only way to positively use sexuality is to avoid it being too dirty. And then the other side of me, the witch side, is like, fuck that, be as dirty as you want, just don't, as long as it's consensual.
Well, this is the other side of when it's approved of and disapproved of. It depends on what its actual social implication is. If it's magic to help an impotent husband help you conceive a child who will be taken to the church and grow up a good Christian, then it's conceived of as fine.
Turtle heads,
right,
saying helps with that.
If it's stealing someone's partner, especially if it's making the eldest of the lord and lady of the land fall in love with a peasant girl or something like that, this is rack and ruin, and its direct impact on the social cohesion of political authority is one of the main metrics for whether or not this love magic is allowed or not. So there's the personal thing of like,
because religion evolved from magic, and religion always, that's the Fraser way, I don't actually believe that, and religion always supports the state the power of the state.
Right.
Which that I believe. That's Karen McCarthy has some great things on that in Fields of Blood, and the relationship between politics and religion and power. That religion always seeks to explain the deeds of the state and justify them. Is important. But I find it interesting that even we're talking about classification of magic, which was against technically the will in general. But like when it's really bad is when you're bringing the downfall of the place that rules where you live, which is going against the will of God because of divine right, because of everything like that. Why do the Windsors rule your people? Sorry.
Started.
I just realized my knowledge of the English monarchy is severely lacking after Elizabeth I, and then I was just confused by everything going on. But Netflix hole helped. Because Al says you're a president so much that sometimes I just at least want to say you're a prince or you're a king or you're a queen or whatever. They don't have a king. Queen. The old German lady in charge of you peeps.
Yep, that's the one.
Okay. She's on currency a lot when you go north of the border.
So yeah, I mean, I think our gamut of dead magicians that we can draw on should be broad and should include, especially if we're talking about necromancy of black magicians, right? Which is again like a witch found at the end of a pointed finger. And as such, not to say
Thank you, Peter Gray.
Thank you. Yeah, not anyone who gets called, a magician should instantly qualify them, and we should unquestioningly say, yes, I'm part of.
No, but in that same hero worship of like Casanova is a term, is a known thing that people don't even know the historical person anymore. They're like, oh, he's a Casanova. That term, that's magical in its own right. To be the hero that is worshipped, your name is eternal. And whether or not this was helped out, the fact that he had the Picatrix on him shows that he was at least engaging in some knowledge of it, which in that time period, the imaginal mind versus the outspoken, it doesn't matter. If he had read it, he had already participated in it in some way. It's not sin in mind as sin in deed, but it is at the same time. And that's fascinating. The other side of it is there are dead magicians that we're going to look upon it and call them magicians by our terms. There's the magicians that are called magicians by other people for political reasons, which is its own thing. Was Rasputin truly a magician, or was he like a mesmerist? Like, what was it? That's its own thing. But certainly, he's worth talking about. And Casanova, I'm sorry to your spirit that we're going to spend all of this 8 minutes talking about other shit around you. But there is something to it. That the discussion of these things, of what is nigromancia, what is folk necromancy. You can't get much more folk necromantic than by being a playboy and using Arabic Greek magic to kind of make sure that you get your way around and get your dick wet. It's not, he didn't do it for gold and riches. I mean, the thing is use what you have.
Right.
But as far as a common use of something,
and not just a use to set himself up as a magician, right? Not writing books about magic, right?
Wow, we should re-examine that in a year when we both finally publish. You've already published, but
But the idea that being a magic user, if we like to fall back on again. My chick tracked Dungeons and Dragons childhood. Like being a magic user isn't the same as setting oneself up as a magician, and we need to move beyond those figures
who does
depicted
magic is a magician.
Well, everyone that does it usefully, or at least creates a big splash. For instance, if we're looking at historical figures, I think that's a way of putting it. That what are you doing with your magic? Is the point? Like he's living his Casanova life, right? He's Casanova.
Obviously, he was focusing on love and not escaping the police or not getting caught. But well,
this is also an aspect, right, of the
CYA,
the escapologists that we find, and the idea of appealing to folk heroes of various...
He said escapology, not eschatology or scatology. I'm just putting that out there.
Oh yeah, no, not this time. I'm thinking...
Not again!
Not again. I'm thinking of Jack Shepherd in some of the ways of reading Hoodoo Jacks, and in cartomancy, and even Robin Hood, or any of these kind of figures who are constantly getting out of a tight spot. And the idea of that being a figure that would be useful for you to know about and to appeal to in some form, So we're also moving beyond Casanova as historical magician and into the realm of...
But I think it's a really good idea of examining a folk magician, meaning someone who is using folk magic as opposed to magicians.
Yeah.
So really what we've opened the door for is not just dead magicians, but dead folk magicians.
Yes.
Because we can look at Adam and Eve, as we have, as the first magicians, the first Hungan, first Mambo, as they worked in voodoo, or whatever the origins of Retziel and these things going in there, or of Muhammad being a magician because of the direct conversation with Jibril, or of Jesus being a magician because of knowledge and conversation with dead prophets on the top of a mountain, not just the magic of the rod and the magic of the miracles of the multiplications of the loaves and the fishes and the resurrection, but like
the transfiguration.
Exactly, the knowledge of conversation with other spirits of magicians, which is I know is a thing for you, I've heard. But with Casanova, of his knowledge and conversation with dead magicians was to read a book written by other magicians, and to get advice about how to get himself ahead. Yeah. Which is fascinating. And that is, I think it is worth saying as we go into the dark time of the year, as we, start to have this kind of Lucifera impulse of going into the dark, that retaining and using the tools that we have to actually get us ahead in life. You do not have to be a totalitarian orange-haired brat. It got very political. But giving yourself the resources to do the best you possible is important.
Yeah.
Sorry for the ding. The idea that magic should be free is, I'm done with it. I'm done with the education of people demanding that anything spiritual or anything like that, that's your Christian baggage. And who cleans the church and who keeps those floor clean and who feeds the people. Right. There's a tremendous money machine going into that. And it's not about milking people for money and not giving them anything in return. No. But if what you want is to be educated in something, pay your teachers, buy the books, buy the materials. Don't sit here and go, I'm sorry, like I don't know anybody. I've had some great success with sigils on notebook paper. I have. But I have access to parchment paper now, and it works better. It's not just an aesthetic thing. It's not just replacing the plastic with the gourd. Right. It does work better. It's a skin.
And it's worked as a skin and provides deeper mysteries. It isn't just, let me get the top-of-the-range thing ordered off Amazon. It provides avenues for further exploration, and further things are powering it.
When you have no choice, use what you have available.
Absolutely.
When you have a choice, examine... You don't have to spend your life savings on fresh parchment, but you could then find out the subtleties of a spirit. We come across this in things that we practice. You have to buy alcohol for a spirit. What kind of alcohol do they like? This one likes the cheap shit because they don't want you to spend money on them. They'd rather you spend time. This one wants nothing to do with you and says, give me the expensive stuff and make your words quick. I find that interesting too, that the parallel to alcohol and the clear alcohol that we give as offerings as being the clarity of speech, that it makes our mouth refreshed and powerful, and that there is something in this exchange as well, that we are asking for the ability for our words to not be misconstrued.
Right. And that it's clear and has a whole set of invisibility mysteries around that alcohol, those alcohols that you can, clean a floor with, that evaporate without trace. Is interesting. The idea of not letting our words fester, not letting things become stagnant, like becoming aerosolized again, and then mingling back with that.
Should have done that earlier. I like the idea of people actually using magic and then being able to talk about it, as opposed to being able to talk about magic in order to use it. And I know that part of that is from lack of exposure to certain tools and things, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to come out of the magic womb, whatever it is, like practicing full wands, but whatever that, I don't know what that means. We've always had an outcry against armchair magicians, and it's oftentimes the armchair magicians that are calling out the armchair magicians because you're trying to get away from your shadow or whatever the hell it is. And how many times, and if we look at this, I'm going to tie it back to Obará here, of not thinking the rules apply to you, of intellectually even or fantastically creating a situation of around yourself where you could give advice to everyone but not take your own. and that the king makes the law but is above it. So oftentimes we're very good at, I say the magical community, me in my own life, in my past, and I'm sure in the future again, of giving great advice, but not necessarily being able to take it.
Yeah.
And part of that is use the magic you have. This idea of, planetary magic is something that we both have a lot of experience in. And there's a lot of criticism of people when they start I don't want to have to wait till Thursday to do this. But the point is not just to wait till Thursday, is that you've done every Thursday, built up a power relationship with the energies of Thursdayness, and that you can make charms and things like that, so that when you need that energy, you can come back and use things that you made and go back. And this was something I obsessed with even in the article I wrote for Serpent Songs of the difference between astrology and astrological magic, that this left-hand, right-handed approach, that there is the worship that happens, there's the understanding of a worldview that is astrology, or going to a standard Roman Catholic Mass and receiving the blessings in that way, the closeness to God, the feeling of spiritual joy that can develop. There is also a thing for seizing it, and you don't have to be a nasty bitch when you seize it, but you can seize it through, this is an election, I'm making a talisman, now I have this power to invoke it at a later time. Or I'm going to seize the power of the saint on this day so I can have access to the saint like it was its feast day at a later date.
Yeah.
And there's something to that. Even if you don't necessarily, we've talked about this, of believe in the saint, the fact that there's 33 million people praying to that saint at Mass that day, that's something too.
Yeah. And the number of your dead that may have gone before those shrines, acted as you've acted,
thing,
said the words you've said,
Oh, I finally know what he's doing.
Right.
Saint Michael, I know him. Wow. I think in essence here, we're obviously winding down, or I'm winding down. Maybe you're just getting started. But I think going into this last little dark of the year, or whenever you might be listening to this, hold on to what makes you tick. I've seen a lot of people kind of give up hope recently. And whether this is in reaction to the state of uncertainty with politics and the world events that are going on, it's more important than ever that we continue to be steadfast, be Lucy, be unmovable, be the sun that does not set, be the sun that is constantly rising even when it sets, to be that light and darkness, to live through the final judgment, to use your pick-a-tricks and get laid as much as you want, to be the strangler fig and take over what you need to take over. I got a little darker for a second. But just go out there, do magic, and be magic. Magic is a lifestyle and a currency of being more than it is. This is not Sunday religion.
Right.
It is not meant for that.
And just because a bunch of 19th century white guys and gals wanted it to be a university framing or an adept school doesn't mean it has to be approached.
Don't wait for Hogwarts to call you.
Right.
Don't pretend you're at Hogwarts before you're there either.
Don't pretend you're teaching there before it exists.
Right. But the certainly in this, there's a lot of criticism of a lot of people online. There's a lot of people trash talking, and as a community, whatever that is, the tongue can build kingdoms up or it can tear them down. And stick well with your friends. Find friends, make friends, living or dead. Sermon over.
Nice.
Wish you a happy end of the calendrical year, a renewed light in your life as we head towards Epiphany and the anniversary of our first show. And thank you so much for listening and waiting for us patiently. Folk Necromancy on Facebook is our group where we're continuing to talk about some of these subjects after and from before. So a lot of these topics will be up for have threads in there.
And we'll be cross-posting on the Radio Free Golgotha site.
Yes, please like us on Facebook at Radio Free Golgotha, and the website will have the updates, and we look forward to getting the episodes up this year so we can have our 5/6/6.5, because we have a couple mini episodes that might come out if we can do it. But thank you for your support. Happy end of the year, happy new year, happy newing year, happy returning year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah!
It's like you're the penguin now. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And good night and good luck.
Be well.